Hi, my name is Robert Chelle with Chelle Law, and I'm an attorney that assists dental associates with employment contract and independent contractor agreement issues. Today I'm going to talk about dental contract renewal and terms. So, what goes into renewing a contract? What are some things you need to think about? And then some strategies to kind of implement the best system for the dentist. All right, so first, there are many ways of structuring the term of a contract, meaning how long it lasts, and then the way that either party can terminate the contract is very important as well. So, as far as how long the contract lasts, for the most part, is generally irrelevant. You can have a 1-year contract that renews for automatic 1-year periods. You could have a 2-year contract, which automatically renews. You could have an evergreen contract, which just means the contract kind of goes on forever until terminated. It honestly doesn't matter how long your contract is, for one main reason. You're going to be able to terminate your contract, and so is your employer, at any time for any reason with a certain amount of notice to the other party, and we call that without cause termination. Generally in the dental industry, 60 to 90 days would be an industry standard amount of time of the notice you would have to provide to your employer. And so let's say it's a 90-day without cause termination. You'd write your resignation letter, the 90-day window would kick in, you'd work out those 90 days, and then you would be done. So, so the length of time, the term of the contract, when you have without cause termination is generally, as I said before, irrelevant. Now, what could be tied to your initial term? Well, if they paid you a signing bonus, relocation assistance, many times they'll make you stay for a period of time or have to repay back the amount. And many employers will tie the repayment period to the initial term of the contract. So if it's a 1-year term, then you would have to stay for a year or perhaps pay back an amount of the money. If it's a 2-year term, you have to stay 2 years or pay back the amount. Evergreen contracts are probably, I would say, much more common than they were 10 to 15 years ago. Some people are surprised and say, well, I want to be locked in for a period of time. No, you always want the option to leave. And so you never want to be in a scenario or a contract that says, I don't know, you can't use without cause termination in the first year. And especially in the dental industry, there's a few reasons for that. One, if you're paid purely on collections and you can't terminate your contract without cause for, let's say, a 1-year period, you could be stuck in a job that has terrible pay with no ability to get out of it. Let me give an example. So let's say you start a job and they'll have, a common amount is maybe, 90 days of a guaranteed daily rate, and then it'll transition into collections. Let's say it's 35%. So, and then your contract will say you cannot terminate the contract without cause in the first year. Well, let's say you're 6 months into the contract, you're being paid purely on collections, and you hate it just because the patient volume is so low. And so, maybe it's 90 days before the end of the 1-year term, you give notice. The employer's like, this person's not going to stay here long term, and they just slowly bleed you dry. You get no new patients, you're just sitting around the office, you're making no money, and you can't get out of the contract. That's the worst possible scenario that you can be in. So it is uncommon to see that, but I certainly have seen it before. So you want to make certain you can terminate the contract at any time for any reason, as soon as the contract starts. One thing you also want to get into the contract is language that says if you give notice that the employer can't significantly reduce your schedule during the notice period. So that's another, kind of problem would be maybe you can terminate it at any time, but once you give notice, the employer once again says there's no reason to give this person any new patients, and so we're not. And then they just slowly bleed you dry and you're just stuck for the last 90 days. So putting language in there that just says the employer will not significantly change your schedule in the last 90-day period, can save the dentist a lot of hassles. Last red flag about either renewal and some of the terms associated with that if you have a contract where you're paid on collections, you want to make certain there's at least, I'd say, a 90-day window from when you leave the employer to when you get credit for all the collections that they receive. And let me explain this. When you do a service, many times the practice won't be paid for a month or maybe 45 days. And so if you're working your last month, many of those collections aren't going to come in until after you've left the practice. And so you want to make certain there's language in your contract that says you will get credit for all of the collections received by the practice after the date of termination, maybe for, as I said before, 90 days. And then last thing about renewal. So many dentists are, I guess kind of surprised when they say, well, there's no raises worked into the contract, meaning if you're just paid a straight base salary, it just says, this is what I get, for infinity. When is a good time to renegotiate? And so if you do have a 1-year contract and it automatically renews for 1-year periods, then obviously sometime, 30 to 60 days before it renews, that would be a good time to go to the employer and say, all right, here's all the compensation that I received last year. Here's my productivity, and I'd like a raise or a higher percentage of collections. If you have an evergreen contract, meaning that it just goes on forever, after a year or two, certainly would be another time that would be acceptable to kind of reach back out to the employer and say, hey, I'd like to talk about, my compensation and perhaps changing the structure of it. Just going to the employer and saying, I want a raise is not effective. You need to have a plan, you need to have the numbers, and you need to justify why you should make more money. All right, that was a little bit about kind of contract renewal, termination, and some compensation terms when it comes to the length of a contract. If you have any questions about your employment contract or independent contractor agreement, feel free to contact my law firm. The information is listed below in the description, and I appreciate you watching the video. All right, take care.